Hi there, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be all about lesson planning for undergraduate instructors. If you're new to my channel, my name is Dr. Lila and this channel is all about college teaching. Special shout out to adjunct instructors and new college instructors who are starting out in the undergrad classroom for the first time or even in the first couple of years. That early period where you're really trying to figure out what you're doing, who you are as a teacher, and best practices. In my last my last couple of videos actually, I asked for suggestions and a lot of you wanted to know about lesson planning, about how I approach that. So to try to make this as helpful and applicable to the greatest number of people possible, I'm not going to be talking so much about subject matter today, but just about some of the things that I keep in mind when I'm putting together a lesson plan. And I've split it up into things I think about before the lesson as I'm creating the lesson plan, things I think about during a lesson, and after. So just to give you a little bit of quick background on me, this is my fourth year as an adjunct instructor for undergrads, and I teach a variety of classes. I've taught 3 classes at the undergraduate level. This semester I'm teaching 2 separate courses for the first time in the same semester, so that should be fun and exciting and slightly terrifying and real crazy, but I'm excited for the challenge. And I actually teach 2 double periods. I have upper level students, mostly juniors and seniors, but I have in the past taught freshmen and sophomores. And you can go back and watch my last video. I think it's called What's in My Teacher Bag and New Challenges. Just I reflect a little bit on some of the new things I'm facing this year teaching 2 different classes. But I've got 14 students in one of my classes and 28 in the other. I think I have about 4 or 5 who are actually in both, taking both classes. So 4 or 5 fewer names to learn, yay. So lesson planning. This is such an interesting, thank you so much for the people that suggested this video, because I think this is definitely something I was not formally taught how to do, and something I've been trying to learn as I go, and I would have loved someone to talk to me about this back then, so I really hope that this video will be helpful for people who are learning to do this for the first time. So the first thing that I want to say in terms of things I do before I teach a lesson in creating a plan, I like to do written lesson plans. I think written lesson plans are super important. They may feel a little bit like overkill, especially if you know the material really well, like planning out what you're going to do for every minute of a class may seem like too much. Once again, the cat is joining us for this video. Sorry, she's been alone all day and she wants my attention, so she may be popping up in the corners of the video. What can I do? Nothing. So anyway, written lesson plans are really great. I think, it's really easy as an adjunct instructor, especially if you're like me, you have a full-time job and this is your second thing that you do during the day. It is so easy to fall into this pattern where you're planning class on the way there, right? You kind of what you need to get to, what they read, so sort of what you could talk about, and you're planning on the way to the class, or you wake up early that morning to figure it out, and you kind of are just thinking about just getting through the class that's right in front of you. Well, that's all fine. I've done it. You can get to the end of a semester that way, and you can even, do a decent job. But when you go to teach that class again, if you don't, if you're not intentional about the planning and about recording, the effectiveness of the different things that you do, you're going to have to do it all over again. And it's just going to feel like this ongoing treadmill of chaos, which is not optimal. So I do a written lesson plan. That's the first thing. The second thing is I try to think about the time of the class in discrete blocks, discrete activity blocks. So thinking, what are the things that I want to get through today, and actually trying to write myself a list of, okay, we're going to discuss the reading, we're going to do, an exercise where I want them to learn X and Y, they're going to take a quiz, actually write out what they're going to do, and then figure out an order to put those in, and I'll talk a little bit in a minute about the order. But what I like to do is start every lesson plan with a little heading that says, today we will, and a colon, and then a numbered list of everything that I want to get done with the group. And I actually will write that on the board at the beginning of class. I think, first of all, it makes students feel like you are very organized and that you know what's going on, and that it gives you authority if you show them at the beginning of class that you have a plan for exactly what you're going to do. And lets them know throughout the period sort of where they are in, what have we already done, what are we doing now, and what, do we still have left to do before this day is done, before this class is over. So I think a Today We Will list is super, super helpful, and it also lets them look back later and think, okay, what were the things that we talked about last class? If they're reviewing or studying for a test or anything like that, it really helps them, especially if you've got students, freshmen or transfers or sophomores or anybody who isn't, there goes the tail. Anybody who isn't super, expert at taking notes yet and remembering that Today We Will is a really helpful piece for them in terms of studying and remembering what happened in each of the class sessions. So I like to do that. And then when I'm actually outlining what's going to happen throughout the class, I try to mix up active and passive activities. So a couple of people asked in the comments like how to keep class exciting and keep it moving. I think the main thing is variety. So I try not to, I'm so sorry, that is so distracting. There she is. I try not to just lecture for long periods of time without including some kind of activity that, where students are actively, generating ideas or participating. So trying to mix those things up. When I am creating the lesson plan, I will also make a note of how long I think each activity is going to take. So, it's like when you start giving presentations in grad school, presenting your research, you're kind of guessing how long things are going to take. At least with a presentation, you can practice in advance. I've never gone and practiced an hour and 20 minutes worth of material that I'm going to teach. I mean, you really have to just make your best guess and then sort of see how it goes. So the first time I'm going to teach a lesson, I'll always over plan and think of a couple of extra activities just in case, discussions, I can't get discussion going as much as I want or lasting as long as I want. You don't want to run out with 20 minutes at the end of class just kind of awkwardly like, okay, should I let them go? Should I make something up? Just over plan a couple of extra things. And my last tip in terms of that is anything you think you might get to, put it on the list of Today We Will, because when you get to the last thing on the list, people are going to start mentally wrapping up. So the last thing on my list is always preview next week's reading. I'll talk about that in a second. But anything else that I think I might get to, I'm going to put that before that, because once I get to that point, people are starting to pack up their bag and they're starting to kind of transition out mentally and think about, getting on the train or whatever is the next thing that they're going to get to. So my advice would be over plan, think of a couple of extra, bits and pieces that you might get to and put them on the list. And if you don't get to them, that's okay. So those are the things that I think about ahead of time. And then during class, I try to kind of do three things in every class. The first thing is I always discuss the reading assignment for that day, always. I think this is especially important in the first half of the semester because you're training students to expect that if you give them a reading assignment, it's because you are going to talk about it. It's because they are going to be responsible for knowing it, and you are going to expect them to be able to discuss it and ask questions and participate, actively. I think if you assign reading and then you don't discuss it, especially if you do that a lot at the beginning of the semester, they'll start to realize like, okay, I can get away with not doing this. I'm going to skip it. And then when you want to have a discussion, you won't be able to. So making sure I always take, even if it's 10 minutes at the beginning of class, to discuss the reading. Even if I've given a quiz on the reading, I'll still, or a response paper or anything like that, I'll still take 10 minutes and just talk about it. And the other thing is, I've talked about this in my assessment video, but you always want to create the opportunity for students to tell you they didn't understand something. Your assessment, you're asking students to demonstrate mastery and understanding of material, but you want to make sure that you're giving them a space to tell you that there was something that they didn't understand. So discussion at the beginning of class is good about that. So I always make sure to discuss any reading that I assigned or any, activities that I assigned, anything like that. The second thing is that I always do during class related to lesson planning is I've estimated how long I think something is going to take, but I always am watching to see how long it actually takes. So it takes a little bit of presence of mind. I was very nervous when I started teaching, and I still, at the beginning of the semester, will be a bit nervous and just sort of going quickly from one activity to the next. But once you get comfortable, you got to start watching the clock and figure out how long things actually take. And you want to make a note of that in your lesson plan, because you want to remember, if it took 15 minutes longer than you thought it was going to, or you thought it was going to be this great activity that would take up 20 minutes, and like 8 minutes in it was going nowhere and the energy was dead and you had to stop and move on, you want to see to yourself, like, okay, how long did that take, and make a little note before you move on to the next thing. The last thing I said, or the last thing I want to mention that I do during a lesson that I mentioned previously, is ending with a preview of next week's reading or next week's assignment. So I think one of the things, that I really struggled with in college was getting readings out of context, like getting book chapters or even entire books assigned and not really understanding like where they fit into the general canon. I mean, this happened to me the most in like the social sciences and the humanities in college, but not like really understanding. I mean, there could be a pedagogical value to approaching something blind and having students just read it with no preconceived understanding of what they're looking at. And if there's an argument to do that, then do it. But if not, I think it's really good to set up context and make sure that students understand what they're looking at. So this is an article from an academic journal. As we've talked, this would be in my class, as we've talked about, academic journals are a place where researchers publish their work, where they talk about, studies that they've done and what they found, what methods they used, what their findings were, what questions remain to be answered. And the article that I've assigned you is a piece of research about X, that was done by these 3 researchers. What they wanted to find out was why. The first thing I always tell you is to read the abstract. As a reminder, the abstract is a summary that will show you the research questions, the methods, and the findings. And the reason I'm assigning this to you, that's a great one. The reason I'm assigning you this reading is because I want you to get in the habit of evaluating research methods and deciding whether or not researchers' findings are valid based on the methods that they used. Just that simple of telling them why you're assigning them something can give them the context whether they don't approach, the reading and just like not really get what they're looking at and sort of shrug their shoulders and move on and maybe not even read it. So I even will do that with a book. I'll preview kind of what happens in a book and like make it sound exciting. And I know it's like, well, they're in college. Like if you assign the reading, they should just do it. They shouldn't need you to make it exciting, but they're humans. And I remember what college was like for me. If I knew a little bit what to expect, and if it was something that I thought might be interesting, then I would like approach it with a little bit more energy and enthusiasm. So I don't think there's anything wrong with doing that for them. So I'll always end with preview of reading for next week, preview of, upcoming assignments, or hey, everybody take out your course calendar. Let's just look at where we are in the semester and what's still coming up, and what projects and papers are on the horizon or whatever. So I'll always end with a preview. And then 2 things to think about after a lesson is over in terms of planning. One is to sit down and make notes. So one of my biggest mistakes that I constantly make when I'm cooking is I'll research and I'll take bits and pieces from a bunch of different recipes, make a dish, love how it comes out, and then not write down what I did. And so then when I want to go back and recreate it, I'm scrambling to figure out okay, what links did I look at? Did I use the measurements from this one or this one? What oven temperature did I decide on? It's the same idea. You want to make sure that if you've spent all of that time, perfecting and seeing what works, or knowing that something didn't work, you want to make a note of it so that the next time when you go back to do this again, you remember and you don't have to reinvent the wheel on how to teach a certain class. There is nothing better than the feeling of going, okay, I haven't taught this one particular class, in 3 semesters, but I think I did lesson plans for it, and then finding all of your lesson plans and they're actually written out and you did some reflection on what went well and what didn't go so well. I don't know about you, but I can't remember that. I can't keep it all in my head in between all of the grading and the traveling and the stuff for my full-time job. If I don't write it down, I'm going to forget it, especially after time goes by. So taking even 10 minutes and writing a quick reflection, or even writing just, okay, this took this long, and having that done is going to save you huge amounts of time and energy in the future. So that's a tip, is to take 10 minutes after class and just make some notes on your lesson plan about how it went, what you would do differently, just anything of note that happened. And then the last thing, I like these super practical suggestions that maybe don't need to be said, but just in case you hadn't thought of it, is saving your lesson plan somewhere in the cloud. So either emailing it to yourself, the one with your notes on it, emailing it to yourself. I keep all of my lesson plans in Google Docs, because as much as I want to have it printed out with me when I go, a lot of times that doesn't happen, and I have to pull the lesson plan up at school. What will happen a lot of times is I don't, now that I know I've got lesson plans for every session, I may not even get a chance to look at it until I get to, maybe I can get to school an hour and a half ahead of time, pull up my lesson plan, kind of remember, okay, this is what I did, this is what we're going to do today, and go through it that way. But that won't work if you've got it on your personal computer and not saved to the cloud. So that's just a practical suggestion that has worked for me. So I hope that some of those lesson planning tips are helpful. Part of the point of this channel is for me to just document and remember this time in my career. And so I wanted to just share before the end of the video something that happened last week in class. Like I said, I've got two courses I'm teaching this semester, and the second one in the week is a qualitative research methods class. I've got 28 students in that class. So first of all, I said in the last video I wanted to see how it was going to be to teach two different courses. And the first thing that I noticed is that I was less nervous even just introducing myself and going through the syllabus in that second class than I was in the first, even though they were two different groups of students, two different sets of subject material, and the one I did second I taught longer ago than the one I did first. It's still, I just thought it was so funny. I mentioned in the previous video that I have in the past taught a class in the morning, gone to work during the day, and then come and taught the same class to a different group of students in the evening. And I wondered, if it was going to be the same dynamic where the second class went smoother and I got through the material faster and just felt more confident. Would that be the case when the material was different in the two classes? And the answer is yes. So I thought that was super interesting. The second thing I wanted to just mention that happened is I did something I've never done before. This is going to sound like, wow, really? You've never done that before? I read the course description out loud. I've never... Want to say hi to the people? I don't know. She doesn't really want to say hi, but she doesn't want to not be in the video either. I read the course description out loud. So I guess I always figured, like, my school, you have to put the course description on the syllabus. And I figure they registered for the class, they must have read the course description. Not at all. They registered for the class because they had to register for it to meet a graduation requirement. Some of them might have been curious and read the course description, but a lot of them just register. So they don't even come to class really knowing what we're doing. So I thought, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to read this sentence by sentence, and I'm going to see if students know what these words mean. So I would read a sentence and be like, okay, ethnographic. Anybody know what that means? Raise your hand. And just to see what people already know. What do they come in, what knowledge or experience do they come into the classroom with? And, even I got to talk about what does it mean that we're going to talk about research on hidden and vulnerable populations. Because those words are, more common than ethnographic, you figure that students know what that means. But when you really start unpacking, okay, what's an example of a hidden and vulnerable population? It was a great conversation starter. The course description was a great conversation starter. The things that you learn in year 4 of being an adjunct is amazing. It's amazing. So I had never really thought to do that before, and it went really well. So I just want to encourage anybody, if you've never read the course description and processed it with the students as part of your first day, it can be really valuable. So it's like the obvious things that you don't think about. You want to just be this brilliant instructor and inspire people and take them to new intellectual levels, but sometimes it's quite simple and we overlook the simple things. So just wanted to throw that out there. I hope that this video was helpful for people, and I would love to hear from you. So please, if you haven't subscribed already, do so. And whether you subscribed or not, I would love it if you'd leave me a comment and just let me know what subject do you teach and how many students do you have this semester, and maybe something that you're excited about or worried about. And any video ideas, any topics that you want me to discuss, definitely leave them below. I'm really having a lot of fun with this channel. I want to keep it going, so just hoping to know what would be helpful for you to hear about. Have a great week of teaching, and I will see you again soon. Bye.